when your kid is at home all day, there's a decent chance you've got siblings at home all day. And so I'm working with the older siblings, which means that a lot of them have childcare duties that their parents just can't handle because their parents are also working from home or going to work. Sometimes I know a few students are very embarrassed about that background knowledge or background noise that's at home. They can't get a quiet space. They're always apologizing for what happens. And so I think that fewer of my students have run into those issues. And then I compare it to other schools that just aren't able to field the same teams. And it's definitely apparent that the extracurriculars have taken a major hit at many schools.
Same business, different day.
Welcome back to the Same Business, Different Day podcast. We are now into part 2 of our education podcast, a conversation about the students and how they've been affected over the past year. I think the first piece of it went very well, and I hope that you all have enjoyed it. But don't tune out just yet because we have another special guest. Alyssa, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yes. Our next guest is someone very near and dear to me, a family member, my brother. This is Jason Good. He is a high school literature teacher. He works at Bonita Vista High School here in San Diego with a master's in educational technology. He teaches the first year of IB literature. He teaches theory of knowledge for IB and 10th grade accelerated English. I know you have a lot of involvement with your students. It's clear to me that you care about your students and you've worked really hard starting the last school year adapting to this new style of teaching. And so we're just going to talk about, what you've done, the changes you've made, if anything's kind of the same for you, and how your students are adapting with you. So, hello, thank you for being here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
And so let's just talk. I think we can start this conversation the same way as the last one of your initial thoughts going into the pandemic and making the change to virtual teaching. How did you feel about it to begin with?
I think those initial reactions were less inspired by what it meant for instruction because it was so immediate. I mean, we found out in the middle of the school day that schools were shutting down in California, and it was a Friday, and it was just before our spring break. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a lot of time to really process in that initial moment, how is this going to look in the future? And it basically, it spun off of the tail end of our spring break last year. So we were off for, our district has a 2-week break. And then we went into this distance learning afterwards. And so we effectively had time to prep for it and plan for it. And I think that we were all very ambitious, but no one had done that at the time, which meant that we also didn't have a lot of direction. The district collaborated with UCSD and we worked a little bit on training for how distance and remote learning could work. But I will say the most prominent emotion I have felt is like some level of overwhelmed frustration. Mm-hmm. That's how I would describe the process for a variety of reasons, right? I mean, there's so many things going on outside of just the workday, but.
Did you feel that the students were kind of feeling that same way, that frustration, that overwhelming feeling?
There's been sort of a roller coaster of student response, to be honest.
Okay.
Last spring was hard to gauge in terms of how students were feeling, but I knew the students better. And so a lot of them, I felt last year worked out fairly well. The students kind of dealt with it. They were more accepting of how things were working. And I think last year I did have some seniors they were more concerned about the loss of those senior activities that are so ingrained in the ways, that was a big loss for them. And so I think those components of distance learning really negatively impacted them. This year, students have definitely gone up and down. So at the beginning of each semester, students are very excited. They're working hard, for the most part, and they seem to be managing it fairly well. But then at this point, midway through the semester, we start to see more students drop off than we normally would, and it's harder to get them re-engaged.
That's kind of the assessment that we were hearing as we were talking earlier today, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. A lot of kids are feeling burnt out. So how do you help them finish the semester, finish the school year? What is that? What's going on? What are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hard question to answer. This is the first time I've done it. So
okay.
It's the first time we've all done it.
Yeah. I think one big thing is I've made huge changes to my syllabus and classroom procedures that are meant to help kids get through these things, and they seem simple, I think, when they get explained, but it's like, I just accept late work whenever. A kid doesn't have to justify why they're turning something in to me late. I don't deduct points for it being late. The only thing I do is I tell them, you're going to have to meet with me a little bit to tell me and walk me through this so that I can give you feedback. Because usually if it's late, they probably didn't fully understand the instructions, or something's been removed from the way they were approaching it. I think that's made it possible for students to recognize that even if they've fallen behind, they can still catch up. I think a degree of hope is really important for students, to recognize that this isn't a lost cause, being empathetic, trying to recognize that as an adult, I struggle to focus at times from home, and it is overwhelming. And then for them, it's exponentially more difficult. And so to attempt to just be comforting and welcoming is sort of how I do it. Of course, there's the communication with parents. I teach the IB classes, so we have an IB coordinator. So it's not even just from a pedagogical standpoint on my shoulders to help the kids out. I've got this additional resource who is willing to help follow up with kids. I think a lot of times what we find, especially when the vast majority of these students don't know me personally. We've never met. And so that can be intimidating. And so to have this additional person who's not assigning a grade to them as a talking point for them, they can go to, Mr. Phelps, and they can say, hey, I'm struggling in this class. And then Jared can contact me, and we can set that up, and we can make communication more possible. I think the more outlets we offer students, the more likely they are to be caught by some level of a safety net. And so we've just been casting those nets out.
Home Start is a San Diego County nonprofit agency that has prevented child abuse and neglect since 1972. Our mission is to assure the safety and resiliency of children by strengthening families and their communities. Those in our care are already some of the most vulnerable residents in any given year. With the added financial and emotional stress caused by the pandemic, San Diegans most at risk for poverty, abuse, unemployment, and homelessness need our services now more than ever. To support our mission and learn more, please visit www.home-start.org. Together, we can work towards all children in San Diego living in a safe, stable, and a nurturing home.
Ignoring squeals and warning lights on your car is not a good way to lower the cost of owning it. And going without essential business insurance is not a good way to save money in your business. What we know for sure is doing either will cost you more than you will save in the short and the long run. With YourInsurancePlace.com, you can trust a specialist to help maintain your cars and avoid major expenses. Business owners should look to business insurance specialists when it comes to finding competitively priced, quality insurance coverage for their businesses. At YourInsurancePlace.com, we specialize in workers' compensation, general and professional liability, employment practices and cyber liability, property owner policies, and bonds for most types of businesses. YourInsurancePlace.com knows that we can help. If you're uncovered, need to lower the cost of your current insurance, or need better coverage, we can help. YourInsurancePlace.com has been helping businesses for close to 40 years. If you need a quote on your insurance, call us now at 858-569 888-8100 or find us at yourinsuranceplace.com. We are business insurance specialists ready to help.
Vista Chamber of Commerce is a proud supporter of the Same Business, Different Day podcast. We support our business members with promotion and marketing, business referrals, educational opportunities, workforce development, and advocacy. Check us out online at vistachamber.org.
The Film Hub is the future of co-working right in downtown Vista. Get energized to go to a safe work environment that is clean and sanitized. Create video content, live stream events, and all of your marketing material in our audio and video facility. The Film Hub. Do your best work here.
I like that.
Frequently, yeah.
I like that. I mean, I think one thing, and I'm not trying to mirror the earlier episode or anything, but I think one piece that's important when you talked about accepting late work and, students falling behind, I think one thing that was mentioned earlier was these extenuating circumstances, right? And I wonder if you're seeing that with the students, or the students confiding with you a little bit. I mean, you're talking about people who may have lost someone, or people, beyond that, maybe it's some technological issues. Maybe there's a sibling who, is more on the spectrum and is disruptive in the household, or maybe there's, no parents home. There's so many different circumstances that could be involved with how they fall behind, as opposed to what they would have in front of them one-on-one in a classroom with you.
Yeah. And I mean, the list you just provided, we've definitely seen it all.
Okay.
It's the first time that a kid talked to me about losing a family member to COVID was a very challenging conversation to have.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I attended a couple of Zoom funerals over, this past amount of time. I mean, I never even heard of such a thing, So, yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that.
A lot of people are parents and outsiders to education. I've heard conversations about, are the kids learning the same material? Are they getting the same education? And so in your position, do you feel that you're covering the same amount of material that you would as an in-person classroom?
Material is a hard thing to define, I think. So just like we do focus on skill development, and so we're focusing on the same skills. Speaking skills are very difficult for obvious reasons to work on, and so I think that many of our students have been shortchanged in the skills that they get to develop in terms of communicating with one another, because the video call makes that very difficult. We do small groups, but it's hard to monitor the breakout rooms. In terms of material, there have been definite cuts in the quantity of, just the amount of material that we've covered has definitely been cut and shortened. Just the week before this spring break, I realized I was covering the same amount of material in a 90-minute lesson that I would typically spend a full week on. And so obviously I had to cut content from that lesson. And unfortunately, it's the fun parts of the content that you cut.
Okay. And how are the students responding to that? Do you feel that they're still retaining information?
Definitely feel they're retaining information. The difficulties that I'm running into right now are not knowing how to work with some of the more complex ideas in remote learning. And so I'll try something, and I've got a lesson in my TOK class that I was just talking to my co-teacher about, where we really thought we had a good plan. And when we looked at the assessment, the students they hadn't responded the way we wanted to. And so we had a follow-up discussion, realized where we went wrong. But at that point, you've lost a week's worth of instructional time. And so I think the kids are still improving. But in terms of a class like that IBTOK class, it has a higher level assessment in addition to the state assessment that we do. Those will be challenging things to make up. Not impossible, but definitely difficult.
And then how with the colleges? I mean, how are they looked at, on the next level after this? When we're, if we have to skip some of the, and I understand and appreciate what you're saying in terms of skill development, and that's another thing that we were talking about earlier, which is looking at this different. We don't have to go through every single thing because we don't have the time or the ability to do that. But then, are they looked at differently at the end of this school year, or will they be? You may or may not know the answer to this, but I think that's kind of part of why we're having this conversation in the first place, is because we're concerned with how they're getting viewed going forward, how this whole year is getting viewed, from an education standpoint. Some may have more privilege and the ability to thrive during the school year, or maybe just a great teacher, which is awesome too. But then, some don't. And so how will they be viewed going forward? Because it can't just be a throwaway year. We can't pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure I am, super qualified to talk to that. All I can say is I have definitely heard from a number of people familiar with the admissions process through, mostly public schools. So private schools all have their own response. At the end of last year, a large number of universities came out and mentioned that they wouldn't be considering applications in the same way. That was when, a pretty big portion of the country was closing schools. This year, we do also know that through assessments like the College Board and the International Baccalaureate Program, they've been working, a lot with schools to figure out on an individual level, how are your students going to be able to respond to these difficult end-of-year assessments that directly translate to college admissions for most of these kids. Like, that's why they do the hard classes. And so I can make an assumption that universities are recognizing that same thing if these big institutions that are pretty much ubiquitous in the American school system are recognizing it as well. I think that it will be interesting to see how it's developed. I do know that the state of California has, in my district also, has changed some of the ways GPAs are calculated, some of the ways that failing grades might have impacted them. I've been given the opportunity to work with students who didn't meet the passing requirements last semester to help them this semester to make up that credit. So there are definitely things in place to help students with that, college admission process.
Okay. Now you're involved with a number of extracurriculars, helping coordinate and remind the students that school is fun. And there's opportunity here. You just got to look for it and take advantage of it. So tell us a little bit about that and what specifically you're working with and how you've seen it, help the kids get through this.
I've got 3 pretty involved extracurriculars. We host a TEDx conference that students organize. I'm the advisor for that. We have a competitive academic league team with NAQT questions, which we're near the end of the season now. And I also am the coach for the robotics team.
Right.
And all 3 of those extracurriculars have continued to a limited level of involvement. And I think, and Zeke, I know you mentioned accessibility and privilege earlier. I think this is one of the areas that I have seen the biggest problems with personally, because at the beginning of this school year, I did feel that our extracurriculars would probably be non-existent. And then my students were the ones who communicated with me saying that they still wanted to do these activities. And so I got excited at the beginning of the year. We started planning it. We were looking for remote opportunities for students to compete in our 2 competitive organizations, so Academic League and Robotics. And we've been able to continue working on online competitions. So my students have, for the robotics team, we've competed in 1 full round of REC Foundation online competitions. And we're doing the next round now. And we meet 4 times a week.
Wow.
And then with our academic league team, we have also been able to compete. And it's academic league and robotics that I've seen. Some of my students definitely have access to resources or have been provided resources that other schools don't have. So at other schools for the academic league teams, they don't have full JV squads, for example. And some of these teams, their varsity squads have like 5 kids. that are showing up, and it's definitely related to some of those other components. When your kid is at home all day, there's a decent chance you've got siblings at home all day, and so I'm working with the older siblings, which means that a lot of them have childcare duties that their parents just can't handle because their parents are also working from home, or going to work. Sometimes I know a few students are very embarrassed about that background knowledge or background noise that's at home. They can't get a quiet space. They're always apologizing for what happens. And so I think that fewer of my students have run into those issues. And then I compare it to other schools that just aren't able to field the same teams. And it's definitely apparent that the extracurriculars have taken a major hit at many schools.
I see.
But it's still a big deal. I mean, you've talked a bit about your robotics club and activity, and it's fun to hear you talk about it because he'll say things like, these kids are so smart. I don't know how they're doing that. I just help them get it done, but they're the smartest kids I know. And so it's clearly something that they're interested in, and it's good that you're there to facilitate it and make sure that they're still able to do that. Yeah.
My son always competed in robotics, and he's got a computer science robotics class this year, and it's all online. Yeah. So there's no building. There's not much that he's able to do. But he's at least happy to do that as an elective and just get a break, during the school day.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're in your spring break right now, but when you go back, your district has decided to adopt a hybrid in-person model. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not starting right when we go back, but there is the hybrid in-person model is something that they're putting together now.
Okay. And I know you volunteered to go back. You've been vaccinated, and you're not sure yet if you're going to go back, but I'm curious, what does it look like? What does the classroom look like with the kids in the classroom with the masks? Is there plexiglass? Is there social distancing? How does that work?
That's a good question.
Hi, I'm Jeff Fox, founder of Star Fox Media. We're a digital marketing and video production company that focuses on serving small businesses here in Vista, California. We have the team and all of the equipment necessary to produce, film, edit, and distribute your podcast to as many people as possible. For more information, you can reach out to us via email at info@starfox.media or give us a call at 760-385-3117. Let Star Fox Media help you tell your brand story today.
North County Daily Star is the leading source for news and community information. There are 650,000 residents along the 78 corridor in 5 unique cities that share the region, North County, San Diego. We work and play in these cities, so we are all interested in what happens in our common region. There is no cost to subscribe, and it is continuously updated. So look for us on your mobile device or computer at ncdailystar.com.
The San Marcos Chamber of Commerce is the voice of business in San Marcos. With over 50 years of service to the community, we continuously evolve to meet the needs of our members and help solve problems. Our strategic plan is based on 3 pillars. Advocate for our members and small businesses. During this pandemic, we have participated in letter writing campaigns to the governor and have made statements during county board meetings, city council meetings to help businesses open while following health and safety protocol. We continue to work with Cal Chamber to oppose job-killing bills, and we also take stands on propositions that we support or oppose depending on how it affects our small businesses. Another pillar is promoting San Marcos through special events such as festivals, farmers market, Taste of San Marcos, and most recently, candidates forums for the school board elections and also city council. The third pillar is we also provide valuable resources for our members through webinars, networking events, as well as access and introductions to people that will help your business thrive. For more information on the San Marcos Chamber of Commerce, please visit our website at sanmarcoschamber.com.
Yeah, and it's a question I still, in many ways, have myself. The district, I will admit, I feel like my district has done a really good job with what they have had handed to them, and I respect a lot of the decisions that have been made. And so I don't want it to seem like they're unorganized, but right now there's a lot up in the air about how that reopening plan is going to work. So I can only report my current understanding of it, which I have been promised multiple trainings to solidify, right, and clarify where I'll be able to ask questions. There are 2 reopening dates right now that have been set. One of them is optional because of COVID vaccine availability. And that's the one that you can volunteer to go back for, that I have volunteered because, at that point, I'll have been fully vaccinated. And then the follow-up date, which is May 3rd, is the mandatory return where all teachers will be asked to come back to campus. And so the reopening plan is really odd because I think at my school site, we've had just over 50 teachers volunteer to come back. But they don't want to completely shift the student schedule because it will be a hybrid return, which means that only a part of the student body will be able to return to campus, and then the rest of them will continue distance learning. And so for this voluntary reopening plan, they were trying to construct schedules that made sense for students based on which teachers were volunteering to return. And so, and there is no requirement for a student to return right now because the vaccine hasn't been made readily available to them. And if they've got family members at risk or something, or maybe just the inability to get to the school site, they're not being required to return. It's optional. And so basically the way it's going to work is the schedule will stay identical. We're on a modified schedule from what we normally have to accommodate distance learning. And we'll have a 10% student population on campus on any given day. And so that's basically 2 out of the 5 days is when that group of kids would be on campus going through their schedule. And then each classroom has a different capacity cap depending on its size to allow for social distancing so that the students are able to sit far enough apart from one another. And the way that that's been managed so that we don't have to sanitize the desks every single period, which would be really impossible. There's basically been set up in each classroom sections for each period so that we can leave a group of desks empty for 3 to 4 hours before anyone else occupies it. And then at the end of the day, the custodial staff is going to wipe them down. So those have been marked and they've been distanced so that the students can there will be a universal mark system. When they go to each class, they'll know which desks for that period are their color. There's like a little yellow sticker on it for them.
Yeah.
The plexiglass, we've been told, will not be included at our school site, and the justification was related to CDC guidelines saying that the 6 feet that we're implementing is just as effective as the plexiglass. That's the way it's been explained to me. They added and retrofitted every single room that will have anyone in it, excluding bathrooms, so anything with an extended period of time with ionizers. I'll admit to not fully understanding the science behind that, but I've been told there's a button in my classroom that I'm supposed to turn on at certain times.
Probably peace of mind. I understand that the law has been changed to 3 feet for students now.
I read something about that, and I'll admit I'm not an expert. I think that the 3 feet social distancing was the result of some research done in some areas, and I think it did relate to the infection rates. And so I think that, in the South Bay, whatever guidance system they're looking at the moment, and they're kind of predicting, because we have to plan for reopening, it's still within the 6-foot recommended infection rate. And I think, that's definitely news that they're probably considering for how are we going to reopen next year? Like, are we going to be able to do summer school, that type of stuff, as we get numbers and rates down in the South Bay.
I'm sorry, before we move forward, there was one thing that we didn't get to mention earlier, and I really wanted to talk about it with the other folks, and maybe you can give some insight, Jason. I'm interested in knowing what you think about summer school, since you just brought that up. I mean, this has obviously been a marathon for these kids this past school year, but that doesn't mean that some of them haven't fallen behind or like we're saying, checked out. Now, after all of that, do we turn back around and say, go back in the summer? And again, not knowing if summer school is going to be, virtual or in person or hybrid or whatever. But do we go back and try to make up these grades or try to improve on, our skills and what we didn't learn last year, or pick up and try to keep up with the rest of the world in terms of education, or do we just take this break? I mean, I'm not saying what what every parent should do, or but I don't even know how summer school works or looks going forward. But does that make sense, or do we kind of just take a breath here at the end of the school year?
Yeah. And I think that there are so many, like you already pointed out, there's so many variables that I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all response to the idea of summer school and makeup credit. I also don't even think there's a one-size-fits-all for how to do it. I know that my district created some, of course, it took a long time to develop it to make sure that everything was going to be recognized at a state level and approved by the county. But we have a system that's developed specifically for the pandemic that allows teachers to develop specialized and individualized plans for making up things that are related to graduation credit. So any student that, for whatever reason, and there was no stipulation for what could qualify them for this, because students sometimes we just don't know their current situation. Mm-hmm. But anything that could have caused a student to not earn credit for a class like an English class, which is required to graduate, they could work with their teachers. And so I've got a couple of kids that we've developed just an individualized learning program, and I just meet with that kid. We talk about the skills that they kind of fell behind on, the things that I can do to get them prepared for it, to get that credit back. And I think those kids are benefiting from it, but it was optional. So those are kids who self-selected, or maybe their parents talked them into it to do that with me. And I definitely have a couple of kids who elected not to do that with me, and they've chosen other pathways to take. I'm torn on the actual question of is that something that kids should do? Because I think that if a kid feels ready to spend a little more time working on something they fell behind on, I want to provide that opportunity for them. But I also think that they need to be extended some level of break from school if the reason why they've fallen behind is going to continue into that makeup credit. Then it's, I don't think, meaningful learning to say, well, we just want to get this credit made up. And so I'm not familiar with what a kid in that type of situation would be doing, but I do certainly know that with reopening, we've given them more opportunities. And I would hope that kids are not going to be required to do a summer school program. But again, that's coming from a classroom teacher. I don't know the legislation behind everything there.
I think that's a great answer.
Yeah, I agree.
Sometimes she just marvels at how smart her brother is.
It's my big brother. I think we're getting ready to wrap up here. But I'm curious, is there something going forward? I mean, you've spent a whole year doing this. Once you are back in person, are you going to utilize some of the techniques that you've learned over the last year?
Yeah, I've developed perspectives over this past year, and I've tried to remain optimistic, right? I mean, I've had a very privileged opportunity to be able to do all of this with very little difficulty, but I've developed things that I will continue into the rest of this time. One of them is just questioning that, why do we penalize late work so much? And I've always had classroom policies that allowed students to make up credit. Like if they get a poor score on something that was skills-based, like a speaking assessment or a writing assessment, I've had a makeup policy for that. But I've also had these policies where, just for general classroom stuff, I don't accept it late, or it would be marked as a 0. And in the pandemic, we've been given all of these additional strategies, maybe instead of giving a kid a 0%, you give them a 50% on the assignment, which would not tank their grade. It means that they still have the capability of maintaining something that's not 0, right? That's so hard to come back from. But if you're 50%, you can do it. That's not impossible. Right. And initially, when I heard strategies like that before distance learning, it was a non-starter for me. I just, no, that's a 0 if you didn't turn something in. this 50% thing makes sense to me though. And I've seen it work so well to where some kids, when they realize, I'm still in the game here, I can make it, I just need to talk to the teacher a little bit. It's rewarding to see kids feel like they can still come back from it. I think in terms of optional activities as well has been interesting. I was just talking to Matt today about that actually, and how with distance learning and the limited time that we've got, I've opened up a lot of optional class sessions that students can attend, and just to hear other people talk, teachers talk about the literature that we're covering, ask questions, and those optional class sessions have had more attendance than our rosters have. Kids just work really well when they're given choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I value that. And so I want to continue things along those lines that open up doors for students who just need something to feel like they've chosen to be there. And so I've always believed that with the spirit of IB, which is very heavily focused on choice. And I think that the pandemic and distance remote learning has really emphasized the need to provide multiple opportunities. And that's been really useful.
Okay. When he talks about Matt, that was our high school English teacher.
Okay.
Who we're still close with, one of the most amazing teachers. So shout out Matt Davis.
Shout out Matt. We had a couple of questions, or we had a conversation actually with one of our audience, one of our favorite listeners, who is also an educator. He's actually a teacher on special assignment with the Poway Unified School District, Efren Pantaleon. And he was in a webinar where they actually had discussions back and forth with students, and the students kind of gave their input on what they thought about what they had been going through over the past year. So I wanted Alyssa to just kind of read a couple of the quotes that we picked up there, and kind of get your thoughts or input on them.
Mm-hmm. So one of them was under the question, what might you need from the adults around you at school? And so an example is relationships with my teachers, not just talking at me, but getting to know me, listen and connect with me. Sometimes we may need your help. Just asking how we are goes a long way.
Oh, yeah, that is something that we experience all the time. And it's definitely a major problem with distance learning. Most of my kids don't turn their cameras on, right? I don't even see them. I don't know what some of them look like. But when you're on campus and you get to know a kid, you recognize the way they behave. And so when a kid is coming into the room and their behavior is very different, like sometimes it's positive, but a lot of times you catch kids on bad days. Yeah. Being able to ask them about that, being able to touch bases with them and let them know that someone is definitely paying attention is one of the most important parts of our jobs. So, I mean, I think it's exciting to hear. It sounds like that was the kid that was saying that. Mm-hmm. It's exciting to hear a kid responding that way, and recognizing that some teacher on their campus has done that for them. So I like to hear that.
Yeah. Another one is another student asking teachers to be compassionate and patient, as we have all had to adjust back and forth. We are all at different levels. We can't just go back to normal. We all need time to transition back.
That is going to be, I've been thinking about that a lot. That's going to be weird to suddenly, after a year and a half, be in the classroom again, be surrounded by other people, all of whom have been in this similar situation. I think that for many of them, returning to campus this year is going to be particularly awkward because the social distancing is going to be so heavily prominent in their lives. Mm-hmm. And then I'm thinking a lot about the return next year, where we've kind of covered the whole students are behind, and I teach very advanced classes. So I've been encouraging kids to sign up for those advanced classes. We had a huge drop off in the number of students that registered for those advanced classes, which means that students who don't have opportunities are thinking that they can't swing it in these advanced classes that are really critical to those college admissions. And so we've had to start reaching out to those students and telling them, hey, I've seen the development over the past year. I know where you guys are coming from. This is going to be a class that I work with you on to make sure you can do it.
Yeah.
And a big part of that, like promising them, like, I'm not necessarily the most patient human being, but I'm going to keep putting myself in check, and we're going to keep talking about what do we need in the classroom? What help do you need? And, you know, it's when we do finally get the go ahead to reopen and have all of the students back, that's going to still be a learning experience. It's going to be a transition period. We're not going to be able to just go straight back to the way courses were run before. And it's a critical part of education is the ability to be flexible and change and respond to the students' needs. I mean, it changes on a day-to-day basis in regular school, and now we've got some exponential shift in the way that's going to look.
We appreciate your insight there. I think that's amazing, and we're really glad that you took the time out to spend some time with us. For your spring break, you can hop back on the surfboard now. How about, could you give us maybe a thought on who folks should contact? If they want to continue this conversation, where should they be reaching out to? How can they influence going forward to, be about what we're all about, which is the kids first?
Yeah. So if they have kids, it's a big part of it is communicating with the teachers, right? I open up my email and it's got like 700 emails a day. Mm-hmm. It's easy to get lost in that sea.
Sure.
But because it's easy to get lost in that sea, sometimes you need another point of contact. The administrators are hugely important. I know that my school site has really strong administration, and they listen to parents when parents contact them. And so I know that if you've got some level of concern, contacting administration is critical, because especially if it's concern about the well-being of your kid, there are different things that each district has put into place to respond to those concerns. We just need to know who needs that support. And so while we've been closed down, there have been cohorts of on-site students who there just wasn't any level of access, resources that they had, and so they had to work with admin. And so the administration has done their best to reach out, but it's always incredibly helpful to have parents reach back in and say, hey, this isn't working for the kid. Is there anything we can do? And so the administration is critical. I think, I don't know if your question is more about community members having that conversation. I think that someone who doesn't have a kid, I think following just legislation and CDC guidelines and the shifts over time, I mean, things change so frequently that's really important. I mean, even as a teacher, it's hard to stay up to date on what am I expecting to do next week.
Yeah.
And so the kids are asking for patience, and it's like, I need some patience too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I know what you're getting at there. And yeah, it's specifically really, I'm talking about the students really, but, obviously the parents of those students, because, as Lorian said at the end of the last episode, they have a lot more influence and power than they think they do when it comes to the schools. And sometimes we just need to, create this conversation. We have to have this, this communication back and forth so that we can make sure that our voices are heard. And I'm not just talking about in terms of complaints, but I'm sure, just like what you have said earlier, some of this stuff is up in the air, and input would help make some of the decisions of where we go.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you're wrapping this up, but just to talk to that, I like to think that the teachers I speak to represent the way most teachers feel, but I don't know if I can guarantee that. But we've all been providing students with feedback forms about distance learning, and the questions aren't just like, how are you feeling? It's also, we did these 3 different styles of lessons. What worked for you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I've been surprised on the feedback that I've gotten, where some of the things I thought were working, the kids were saying, okay, that's fun, but it's not helping me. This is helping me. And what I learned is I'm getting like 50% of the students say one thing works, 50% say the other thing works. And that's really useful for me. I can work with that, right? I can make sure that I'm using both of those strategies. And so, when students are honest on feedback requests, like, no, I legitimately want to know what's working well and what's not working well for you. Talking to teachers is so helpful. You know, it's surprising what we learn, and a lot of what I expect isn't what I end up hearing. When we talked about the optional reopening, I was expecting a lot of kids to want to do it. And I was surprised at how few of my students were willing to go back to campus this year.
Yeah.
And so that threw me for a loop. And I'm wondering, how many kids am I going to have? If I can have 14 in the room, am I going to only have 2? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, you know, we really appreciate your input today, Jason. I think, you know, this was awesome. This is a perfect caveat to the last conversation we just had. And, you know, you've given us some great insight. And, you know, it actually, you know, some of it's a little different than what we heard earlier, which is important. You know, we want to have the full conversation, and we're like I said, we're kids first. We're just trying to get this information out to everybody. So we appreciate your perspective. Shout out to Ephraim for the questions and his input as well. And thanks so much, Jason Good.
I do have one more.
Okay.
One more question for you. You mentioned earlier your students do TEDx talks. Are they online? Is there a way for our audience to listen to them?
Yeah.
Yeah. A little shameless plug there. Our TEDx conference is going to be a YouTube premiere conference this year. We're not doing an on-site one like we've done in the past. If you go to the TEDx website and look for TEDx Bonita Vista HF, you'll find our speakers lineup and the information there, all the bios and talking points. The theme is weathering the storm, but not just focused on COVID. And if anyone does want to tune in, it's an invite-only link. So contacting the student organizers through the TEDx website is the best way to get that invite link and be able to see those videos when they get launched.
Excellent.
Otherwise, you know, TEDx posts them afterwards too.
Okay.
Great
Perfect.
question.
All right. Jason.
But thank you for doing this. I think this is an important thing to communicate and talk about something that's new and unprecedented and, you know, obviously impacting everyone. That's
right. And we really appreciate you being a part of it.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Same Business Different Day podcast. Special thanks to Star Fox Media for video production and James Russell on music production. Please like and subscribe to the Same Business Different Day podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Same business, different day.